Ethan Carter could not remember a single year of his childhood when he felt truly accepted by his family. From the time he was old enough to understand conversations, he knew he was different from his brother Ryan and his sister Emily. Ryan was the pride of the family, earning perfect grades and winning academic awards that filled the walls of their home. Emily was just as impressive, always at the top of her class, and praised by teachers as someone destined for greatness. Whenever relatives visited, Ethan's parents eagerly shared stories about Ryan's achievements and Emily's accomplishments, but when it came to Ethan, there was usually an uncomfortable silence followed by a forced smile. "Ethan tries his best," his mother would say, as if she were apologizing for him. As the years passed, the comparisons became impossible to ignore. At family dinners, his father often joked that Ryan got all the brains, Emily got all the talent, and Ethan got whatever was left over. Everyone laughed, including Ryan and Emily, while Ethan forced a smile and stared at his plate. At first he thought the jokes were harmless, but after hearing them hundreds of times they began to feel like facts. His parents rarely missed an opportunity to remind him that he wasn't measuring up. If he brought home a B on a test, they asked why it wasn't an A if he earned an A. They pointed out that Ryan had done it more easily. Nothing he achieved seemed good enough. By high school, Ethan had become known as the family's disappointment. His parents attended every award ceremony for Ryan and Emily, taking countless photos and proudly sharing them with friends. Ethan's events were often forgotten. When he played in a school soccer game, he searched the crowd for his parents but found empty seats. Later, they apologized and explained they had been busy helping Ryan prepare for an important competition. Deep down, Ethan knew where he stood in their priorities. Despite his struggles in academics, Ethan possessed qualities that nobody seemed to notice. He was kind, hardworking, and dependable. When neighbors needed help moving furniture, Ethan volunteered. When elderly residents needed groceries delivered, Ethan offered assistance. When his friends faced problems, he listened without judgment. Yet these qualities never earned praise at home because they couldn't be measured on a report card. His parents only cared about achievements they could boast about. The older Ethan became, the more isolated he felt. Family gatherings were especially painful. Relatives constantly asked Ryan about medical school and Emily about law internships while Ethan sat quietly in the corner. Occasionally someone would ask what he planned to do with his future, and before he could answer, another relative would joke that he was still trying to figure it out. The laughter always followed. Ethan learned to hide his feelings, but every joke left another scar. After graduating high school with average grades, Ethan decided college wasn't the right path for him. The announcement caused a storm inside the Carter household. His father called it the most disappointing decision of his life. His mother cried as if she had lost something precious. Ryan and Emily exchanged looks that made Ethan feel even smaller. While his siblings pursued prestigious careers, Ethan took a series of regular jobs. He worked in warehouses, retail stores, and construction sites. The work was demanding, but he approached every task with dedication. Unfortunately, his family saw these jobs as proof that he lacked ambition. At holiday dinners, conversations often turned into lectures. His parents urged him to return to school and become someone important. Ethan tried explaining that success could take many forms, but nobody listened. To them, he was simply the child who had failed to live up to expectations. The years passed, and the pattern never changed. Whenever Ryan achieved a new milestone, the family celebrated with expensive dinners and heartfelt speeches. When Emily won an important case, everyone gathered to congratulate her. Ethan's accomplishments went unnoticed. Once he received an employee recognition award at work after helping save a struggling project. Proud of himself, he brought the certificate home and showed it to his parents. His father glanced at it for only a few seconds before asking if he had considered taking community college classes. The certificate ended up forgotten in a drawer. That night, Ethan sat alone in his room and stared at the paper. For the first time, he wondered if his family would ever see value in him. Still, he refused to become bitter. Every morning he woke up and continued working hard. Every insult became another reason to keep moving forward. Every comparison became fuel for determination. Although he often doubted himself, a small part of him believed there had to be more to life than living according to someone else's definition of success. Yet the emotional damage continued to grow. During one family reunion, his father introduced Ryan as the future doctor and Emily as the future attorney. Then, pointing at Ethan, he laughed and said, "And this is Ethan, our experiment that didn't quite work out." The room exploded with laughter. Ethan laughed too because he didn't know what else to do, but inside something broke. On the drive home that night, he replayed the moment again and again. The people who were supposed to love him unconditionally had turned him into a joke. No stranger had ever made him feel as worthless as his own family. As he looked out the car window at the passing lights, he made a silent promise to himself. One day he would build a life that made him proud, whether his family approved or not. He didn't know how he would do it. He didn't know when it would happen. But he knew he could no longer spend his life trying to earn acceptance from people determined to withhold it. For years his parents had labeled him the dumb one, the failure, the child who would never amount to anything. They believed they understood exactly who Ethan Carter was. What none of them realized was that the qualities they ignored, his resilience, loyalty, work ethic, and determination, would eventually take him further than any report card ever could. And while his family continued measuring worth through grades, titles, and prestige, Ethan was about to begin a journey that would challenge everything they believed about success. A few years after leaving school, Ethan settled into a modest life, working long hours and trying to ignore the constant criticism from his family. While Ryan was becoming a respected doctor and Emily was building a successful legal career, Ethan was still viewed as the family's disappointment. One day, an old friend named Marcus contacted him with an opportunity. Marcus had launched a small technology startup focused on improving supply chain operations and believed Ethan's real-world experience would be valuable. Although Ethan had no degree in technology or business, Marcus trusted his judgment, work ethic, and problem-solving skills. For the first time in years, someone saw potential in him instead of failure. Excited by the opportunity, Ethan invested most of his savings and joined the startup as a partner. When he told his family, they reacted exactly as he expected. His father called the decision foolish, his mother worried he was throwing away his future, and his siblings questioned whether he understood the risks. Their lack of support hurt, but Ethan had grown used to it. The startup's early days were difficult. Money was tight, clients were hard to find, and long workdays became normal. There were moments when Ethan wondered if he had made a terrible mistake, yet he refused to quit. He helped improve the company's products, worked directly with customers, and used his practical experience to solve problems others overlooked. Slowly, the business began gaining attention. New clients signed contracts, revenue increased, and investors started showing interest. While his family continued treating him like a failure, Ethan quietly helped build something remarkable. 3 years later, a major corporation approached the startup with an acquisition offer. Negotiations began, and the company's value rose far beyond anything Ethan had imagined. For the first time in his life, he realized that the qualities his family had always ignored, determination, loyalty, and hard work, were becoming the very reasons for his success. The day Ethan's life changed forever began like any other. He arrived at the office early, carrying a cup of coffee and preparing for another long day of meetings. For months, the startup had been negotiating with a major international corporation interested in acquiring the company. Although the discussions had been promising, Ethan tried not to get his hopes too high. He had spent most of his life expecting disappointment, and old habits were difficult to break. That morning, Marcus called an emergency meeting and gathered everyone in the conference room. The excitement on his face was impossible to hide. As soon as everyone was seated, Marcus announced that the acquisition deal had officially been completed. For a moment, the room fell silent before erupting into cheers. Employees hugged each other, some cried, and others simply sat in shock. Ethan could barely process what he was hearing. Years of sacrifice, stress, and uncertainty had finally paid off. Then Marcus revealed the final numbers. Because of his ownership stake in the company, Ethan's share of the acquisition was worth $47 million. Ethan stared at the paperwork in front of him, convinced there had been a mistake. He read the figures again and again, but the number never changed. The man who had once struggled to keep a few $1,000s in savings was suddenly worth more money than he had ever imagined. As the reality slowly sank in, Ethan felt overwhelmed with emotion. He remembered every late night, every rejected proposal, every moment when he had doubted himself, and every cruel joke his family had made about his future. The same people who called him the dumb one had spent years insisting he would never achieve anything significant. Yet here he was, holding proof that they had been wrong all along. News of the acquisition spread quickly. Within days, local business websites published articles about the deal, and Ethan's name appeared alongside stories about the startup's success. The phone calls started almost immediately. Relatives who had not spoken to him in years suddenly wanted to reconnect. Former classmates sent congratulatory messages. Neighbors who once ignored him now greeted him warmly whenever they crossed paths. The most surprising reactions came from his own family. His mother called him several times in a single day, eager to discuss the exciting news. His father spoke proudly about Ethan's success to anyone willing to listen. Ryan and Emily, who had always viewed him as the underachiever of the family, suddenly treated him with unusual respect. Ethan noticed the change immediately. For years, they had barely shown interest in his work, but now they wanted every detail. During a family dinner a few days later, his parents smiled constantly and introduced him as their successful son. Listening to them was both satisfying and painful. Part of him enjoyed finally receiving the recognition he had always wanted, but another part remembered the years of humiliation that had come before it. The praise felt hollow because it only arrived after the money. As Ethan looked around the table, he realized something important. The $47 million had not changed who he was. He was still the same hardworking, loyal, determined person he had always been. The only difference was that now everyone could see it. While his family celebrated his wealth, Ethan quietly reflected on the journey that had brought him there. He wasn't angry anymore, but he hadn't forgotten either. Every insult, every comparison, and every moment of rejection remained fresh in his memory. He knew the time was coming when he would have to decide how to respond to the people who had spent years making him feel worthless. And unlike the scared young man who once begged for their approval, Ethan was finally in a position to choose his own path. A few weeks after the acquisition became public, Ethan's parents organized a large family gathering to celebrate his success. Relatives traveled from different cities, eager to meet the newly wealthy member of the family. As Ethan walked into the event, he immediately noticed how differently people treated him. The same relatives who had ignored him for years now greeted him with smiles and compliments. His parents proudly introduced him to everyone as their successful son, speaking as if they had always supported his dreams. Ethan listened quietly throughout the evening, remembering a very different reality. He remembered the jokes, the comparisons, the disappointment in their voices whenever his name was mentioned. Finally, when everyone gathered for dinner, Ethan stood and thanked them for coming. Then he calmly shared the truth. He spoke about the years of being called the dumb one, the countless times he had been made to feel less important than his siblings, and the loneliness of chasing a dream without his family's support. The room became silent. No one laughed this time. Ethan explained that the $47 million had not made him smarter or more valuable. It had simply revealed what had always been true, that success comes in many forms and that a person's worth cannot be measured by grades, titles, or degrees. His parents looked down, unable to deny his words. For the first time, they were forced to confront the pain they had caused. Ethan then revealed his sweetest act of revenge. Instead of rewarding the relatives who only appeared after his success, he chose to help the people who had believed in him from the beginning. He invested in Marcus's new ventures, supported community programs, and helped friends who had stood beside him during difficult times. His message was clear: loyalty mattered more than money. By the end of the evening, Ethan felt a peace he had never known before. He no longer needed his family's approval because he had finally learned his own value. The boy they had mocked for years had become a successful man, not because of their belief in him, but because he never stopped believing in himself. The $47 million check proved them wrong, but Ethan's greatest victory was discovering that his worth had never depended on anyone else's opinion.